Hello, everyone. How are you doing? And welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show, where we have the discussions that inform, entertain, and empower educators to be the change. I am your host, Dr. Will, and I am here today with Rachael Mann. How are you doing, Rachael?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. I'm very excited to be here today.
Well, thank you for being a guest on the show again. The show is starting to pick up some great headway, and these people and everyone. I'm getting some great guests, right? And I'm shocked because I'm not Oprah, and I'm just a dude with a hangout. So I'm always shocked that people say yes. So again, thank you for being a guest on the show. We follow each other on Twitter, and what really struck me and wanting to have you on a guest on the show was this whole idea of Teach Like TED. So because all of us are familiar with the TED Talk. So I was like, what is this? And when I started to look more into it, I said, okay, I got to get her on the show and spread this information out to my listeners. So for those who are watching the show, will you please introduce yourself?
Yes, and at first, I just want to say you may not be the Oprah Winfrey, but who knows, you might be the next education evangelist, the Oprah of the education realm. And I've really enjoyed connecting with you on Twitter. It's such a powerful tool to really build our professional learning networks. And I've met so many amazing people. So I'm honored to be able to have you as part of that group and to be here today. I'm Rachael Mann. I'm a former career and technical education educator. I taught for about 14 years and then moved on to work at the Arizona Department of Education and was the Educators Rising State Director. If you're not familiar with Ed Rising, it used to be Future Educators some people say of America, but Future Educators Association. And part of my role was to train these students not only in leadership, but in public speaking. And as educators, we get up and we talk to our students all the time, but I had never really thought about how to teach public speaking or even really put a lot of thought into how I connect with my audience through my words. We think a lot about our content, but we don't always necessarily think about that delivery piece, how we're really connecting with our audience. So in order to really dive in with my students, one of the things we did was we read a book called TeachlikeTED by Carmine Gallo. We did a book study, and each student would take turns doing presentations on this. And we really would look at some of the TED Talks, and we would look at the body language, the different techniques, and how they connected with their audience. And the more I saw this improve not only my students and how they were doing their presentations as state officers, but also seeing how my own presentation skills started to transform, I thought, this is something I wish I had during my teacher prep. And I wish this was something I could have used as an educator. So it started out as something I put together as a presentation at a conference. And then that following year ended up presenting it over 24 times, and then decided that it was time to start using my role in education as helping educators connect with students through these principles. And so in January, started just doing this as my full-time kind of consulting piece.
Awesome. So you kind of jumped into question one already.
I like to get ahead a little bit. Oh, I can talk more on that one.
So you're inspired, you create this, and you are out there. What has been some of the responses, and how have you been able to, or how have you heard of Teaching Like TED transforming some of the practices of teachers?
One of my favorite, I guess, feedback that I received happened last September. I was in Orlando at the Best Practices Conference. It's a partnership between ACTE and NCLA to leadership and career and technical education organizations. And I was presenting, and my presentation is always different. Every time I present, I change things because I see more TED Talks and really cool things that I can incorporate. And a gentleman came up to me at the end of the presentation and told me that he saw my presentation a year ago in Phoenix, Arizona, and mentioned that it had changed quite a bit, but then also wanted to tell me that he's not an educator, he's a school board member, and he's a dentist. And he said that he took the principles of Teach Like TED back to his practice as a dentist, and that it had transformed his office. He started using some of the principles such as telling stories, really getting to know your audience, incorporating humor. And he said that it had transformed the relationships with his staff and with his patients. And it was something that, that was an unintended result, to see that it had had an impact on business and industry, but it was so exciting and neat to see that it's something that is transferable to other areas. As far as in education, I've seen folks have shared with me that they've gone back and they've created a TED-like event or even a TED Ed club in their school, which has had a big impact on students, elevating their voice. I've had other folks tell me that it's something that even things like the incorporating humor, that they realize that, hey, I really can build better relationships with my students by just lightening up and laughing and using that as a way of connecting with my students.
Excellent. So in doing my research, I discovered there are Teach Like TED commandments.
Yes.
Please share a few, and how did you come up with them?
Okay, and I can't take credit for the Teach Like TED commandments as far as being something original to me. It's something that I've seen the TED commandments, and I don't know if you're familiar with the TED commandments, but there's a stone tablet that is sent to speakers when they're going to the main event in Vancouver. And this may be something that was done years ago. I don't know if they still actually send the stone tablet, but people would blog about it. And they would talk about how when someone cares enough to send a burning bush, and they would joke about how it was actually this heavy tablet with these 10 engraved commandments that they wanted every talk to incorporate. So it was everything from not selling from the stage, to telling a story, to not stealing time, to make sure that it didn't go over 18 minutes. And so I took some of those and looked at how they could apply in the education community. And some of them are the same, and then some of them are commandments that I gleaned from just watching all of these TED Talks, but then also looking at John Medina's brain rules, because a lot of that is referenced in how the TED commandments are, why they work, why they really engage with an audience. So, for example, one of them is on brain breaks. A TED Talk is not supposed to be more than 18 minutes, and that's designed not just because it's a time that fits into their program, but it's also because 18 minutes is how long we can pay attention before we just start zoning out. So if you think about how our natural tendency when we are listening to a lecture that goes on, we can't help, even if it's a really interesting subject, we can't help but start zoning out, and our brain gets tired after a while. So one of the things with this is that you want to make sure that you're incorporating active participation, which we do as educators. For a TED Talk, you can't do that. So instead, they look at ways to really use different parts of the brain. You'll notice that it'll go from something that's a very serious, heavy topic, and then there's something humorous that's built in, or it may be going from something very analytical to storytelling. And that's a way of really mixing it up so you're using different parts of the brain so that you're not spending too much time in one area to where you start to tune out and you start losing your audience.
Okay. So since you brought up TED Talks, I'm going to throw this out there to you.
Okay.
What are a couple, I guess, of TED Talks that had really resonated with you, and how have you in turn taken that information and informed the work that you actually do?
Oh, that's a great question. So one of my favorites right now is Adam Grant, and it's The Surprising Habits of Original Thinkers. And he talks about how, well, for one of my favorite things that he talks about with his talk is how sometimes we really put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and when something isn't everything we want it to be the first time around, we may quit, or we may say, oh, okay, this is crap. And he uses the word crap in his talk, which it makes everyone laugh. But the first draft isn't supposed to be perfect. When I think about my first time I did a keynote presentation, I thought it was awful. I got off the stage and I thought, well, I've got that off my bucket list. And, we have a tendency to really criticize ourselves, but then they actually invited me back. so that was exciting. But it was one of those things where you're constantly improving. And so that's one that I absolutely love. And it talks about how the more we try, the more successes that we'll have, and that we should allow for failure in our lives. And we don't talk about that enough in education. When you think about our evaluation systems are set up so that you can meet your goals. I've had evaluators, my principal, tell me before, pick some of the low-hanging fruit that that you can accomplish. What are we saying to our educators? To set the bar so high, but no higher. And when you really think about that, we want people to set themselves up with these big ideas, these big dreams that, hey, you know what? You may not reach that goal, but so what? You're getting a lot closer to it, and we're doing bigger things in education. For our students, a lot of times our students want that A or a certain grade, and it's like, okay, how can I make sure I'm meeting and just getting that grade? When sometimes failure is such a learning experience, when our kids are doing genius hours and really putting these projects together that, hey, it may not succeed, but wow, look at how much learning is taking place.
So we live in such a highly connected, app-driven world, and one-to-one devices are everywhere, blended learning, BYOD, you name it, it is out there. How does Teach Like TED fit into the digital space?
Well, first of all, when you think about TED Talks, it stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. That's what it was originally built around, but it's since expanded to encompass pretty much everything. But TED is an organization. They started out with a group of people meeting together in California. Now they have their talks online. Kids can be involved in a TED Ed club, record their talks, upload it, and have it featured in TED Ed. But even taking other technology tools, if I were to hold an event with students, I would want to use something like Flipgrid and have kids get really clear on their ideas. Flipgrid is an app where students give up to 3 minutes of, they can speak for up to 3 minutes, and you can actually have each student displayed almost like in a Brady Bunch grid where you can click on the different talks. What a cool way to be able to really see all of the ideas in one place and respond to it. And we have all of these different apps for storytelling. We have Story Builder. We have ways that we can use like Adobe Voice to do storytelling. So I feel like there's just this natural integration where we can use technology to elevate student voice. For me, I have at least 2 meetings a week that are what we're doing right now, video conferencing. And our students, for them to be able to use that type of a platform and start learning how to record themselves, feel comfortable on mediums like this to where they're actually being able to reflect upon and see their public speaking skills, I think the sky's the limit with really incorporating TED as a platform and TED Ed clubs, this type of communication into that digital space and in our classrooms.
So, and working with different teachers, now I'm wondering about teacher ownership. I'm wondering about teacher styles, ways of communicating, since we all have our sort of own way. How do you, in working with teachers, I know you have your commandments, but how do you work with teachers and owning who they are and not sort of follow how they speak, how they present in, let's say, the style of Levana Roth or an Eric Scheniger, where they are indeed true and authentic to themselves?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the commandments that I actually share is show the real you. And that's about being authentic, because we live in such a world of canned curriculum. We have different standards, we have different style, different requirements as an educator in the classroom. How do you really show the real you bring the real you to the table. And that's so important. Otherwise, anything you say comes across as contrived. Our students can see through that. They can tell if you're not feeling it, if you're not passionate about it, you're just following a list of commandments. I think that for showing the real you, well, first of all, on the TED stage, they started noticing that everyone who was auditioning for TED Talks or invited to the stage, for a while, they started trying to conform to a very specific style. And Chris Anderson, who's the curator for TED, said, hey, we want to see the real authentic you. So whatever that may be, let's take a step back and really make sure you're bringing your own stories, your own self to the table. And that's just an important thing. So I think that each of the commandments, when you look at it, like when you're telling stories, a lot of times those are very personal stories, and stories are a key concept for TED Talks and as a TED commandment. I think about even like with creating a multisensory experience. If you're someone who's musical, I had someone talking the other day about how she uses music to create a multisensory experience. Music for me, I like listening to it, but incorporating it myself, that's not something that I ever really think to do in my lessons, but it's so cool to see how people are pulling in their own talents and skills to create very much of a unique, authentic environment that shows their true self when they're teaching and connecting with their students.
So that I'm going to throw this out there because I'm, again, going to your site. Mm-hmm. There's now Lead Like TED, I guess. Where did that come from, and how is that alike and different from Teach Like TED?
All right, so I had someone come to me at a conference as she listened to my Teach Like TED presentation, and she said, this is great for our teachers. We need this for our leaders. We need our leaders to learn how to communicate and connect with our audience in this type of a fashion. Can you put together a presentation that's geared towards leaders? Don't call it Teach Like TED, because they're going to question why I'm bringing in this presentation. I'm like, why not Lead Like TED? That just makes sense. So I put together a version of, it still has a lot of the similar commandments, but if you pay much attention to my resources, you'll see that I post a lot. I post my presentations for people to be able to use and see, but also that sometimes those commandments will change depending on the audience. So for the Lead Like TED presentation, it still has 10 commandments that are based upon some of them that you'll see for a TEDx event. Those are different than the ones you'll see for a main TED stage. But it's very much of leadership and influence and how to use your voice as a leader to connect with your staff, to connect with your students, and to elevate your role as a leader in a very engaging and impactful way. I also have a version called Speak Like TED that's for working with middle school and high school groups. And now I'm sure that it can be used with elementary as well. However, for me, those are the groups that I tend to work with simply because that's my certification area is 7th through 12th grade. But the Speak Like TED, the kids get so excited about learning how to share their ideas, and just to know that, hey, someone values my ideas. I have something that other people want to hear, and it can really make an impact. I have that power as a student to make a difference in the world. That's powerful when our students learn how much their voice can make a difference in the world around them.
Awesome. So thus far, we've heard all the mac and cheese. Okay, everything is just beautiful, lovely. I want to hear about the pushback that you've had. What has been, quite honestly, some of the challenges you have faced in bringing this to other educators?
I think when someone first hears the concept and they haven't heard the presentation or actually had a conversation with me, they sometimes think that I'm advocating for teachers being the sage on the stage and just talking heads at the front of the classroom. I've had several people post on Twitter saying those comments, which to me, I love how Twitter opens that dialogue, because if they're thinking it, other people are thinking it too. So I want to know that and to be able to respond and clarify the fact that no, if you're following the Teach Like TED commandments, after 10 minutes, you are now engaging with your students in other ways. You're not just talking at them. You're not just lecturing. I've had other folks feel as if it's advocating for showing TED Ed lessons all the time, and that you're diminishing the idea of the professionalism of the teacher, as if there's someone else out there who can do a better job at educating students than we can. And what I always remind them is that, hey, as an educator, this is a relief. When I was a teacher in the classroom, sometimes you feel like you have to know everything. When you can bring other experts into the classroom using these TED Ed lessons, people who know a lot more than we do, we're no longer the only person that has to hold all this knowledge. We're facilitators. We're helping to connect the students with other experts and helping them. Well, and that goes back to that authentic piece too, saying, hey, no, we're still learning too. We're learning for our entire life. Let's look at some other experts and see their viewpoint or their take on this subject.
Nice, nice. Sometimes, teachers. That's just my diatribe for today.
I think with that, there's a very short TED Talk. It's called 30 Days, and it's by Matt Cutts, who works for Google. And he talks about how he started giving himself these 30-day challenges. He would pick one thing to work on for 30 days. And, if it works, great. If not, it's only 30 days. And it's making sustainable, small changes that can actually be sustainable. But when you think about telling someone, instead of saying, hey, I need you to embrace this, why not just pick one commandment you're going to work on for 30 days? If it works, that's awesome. But what do you have to lose? It's only 30 days. And that makes people feel more open to actually trying to implement it, when it's not just, now I have to implement these 10 different commandments into my style on top of all of these other initiatives. That can be overwhelming. We put a lot on our teachers, and I think that sometimes just chunking it down can make a big impact on it being something that's sizable, that it's not going to create a heavy load, a heavy burden for them.
Excellent, excellent. So, today, Rachel, you're just ahead of me today. But for those who are watching and they're listening and they're wondering, okay, this is cool. I want to do this. I want to do something different. This sounds exciting. This sounds like something that could add value into my classroom. However, they're concerned that this is just something else for them to do. What is your advice for them, and what would you say to sort of bring them along?
I think it's sometimes looking at how it's impacted other classes. That's always helpful, hearing testimonies of other people that it's really made an impact. And two, maybe even put a student in charge of, instead of looking at it as, hey, I'm going to work on changing how I teach or seeing if this is something that's effective for me, start out with something that's not even putting the burden on the teacher. Have them find a student leader, if it's a middle school or high school environment, who can start up a TED Ed club. Have them in charge of each of the meetings, the weekly meetings, and the teacher's naturally going to absorb some of this as they're hearing these kids prepare and put together these lessons. And it could be a middle school or high school student in an elementary classroom putting together these TED Ed clubs to elevate student voice. That is a way for them to become very familiar with the concepts without having to make any huge changes right away. I think that, in addition to if they want to pick up one commandment a month to work on and try to implement, between the two of those, I think those are some strategies that would make it something that's enjoyable. And I think if it's something that is one more thing added to the table that they don't see the value in, that's always a hard push. So allowing them to actually see the value before they implement it is huge for really having that buy-in.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks again, Rachel, for being a guest on the show. I definitely want to learn more about this. And people, when you're watching this, you will be able to, on the blog post, be able to see how to be able to get in contact with Rachel on Twitter. This is going on SoundCloud. It's on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. And now I am on iTunes, people. So please subscribe to the Dr. Will Show on iTunes and subscribe there as well. So thank you again, Rachel, for being a guest on the show.
Thank you, Dr. Will. I really appreciate this opportunity to connect with you. And also, the resources are there if anyone wants to check them out and see how to implement it, and even just checking out the TED website. To be clear, I'm not affiliated with TED. I meant to throw that out there in the beginning, but just want to make sure that that's clear. I've had a few conversations with them. We have a call coming up to work on how we can collaborate more, but it's not something that's officially affiliated. But again, thanks so much for this opportunity.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. As always, people, invest in you, eat in you. Peace.